Good evening and welcome to tonight's England Football Learning webinar on the topic of engaging young players in our sessions. To delve into our first theme tonight, we're going to start to look at how we can recognise the holistic characteristics of young players, and probably most importantly to start that is what do we mean by holistic characteristics?
I think an appreciation of how different they are helps you to then probably get the best out of them. One of the things that I think is quite important is that if we can understand that journey, we can probably do more to support them, to then recognise what they need to move forward.
Everything that she said and everything she talked about is relevant to any group of children that we have in our care, whether that's boys, girls, para pathway, or in a school. Ultimately it's about that whole child development and helping them to be the best people and the best players that they can be. I'm going to come to you first, Gary. Coaches might automatically, think of a skill as the technical corner. So if we touch on that one first, are there any that stand out for you in terms of being essential from the technical piece of the four corner?
Yeah, right. I think, the obvious one is coaches. If we look at it, we probably look at receiving, turning, etc. But I think obviously the title of this webinar and Paul made for me, the key point in the technical corner at the start was, I think our role as coaches is to make sure that these kids love coming to training, they want to come, and then link to that. Once we get a great environment, they want to come, then we can find out their motivations. So think as, the panel have alluded to this evening, but also in Lydia's conversation as well. How is it individual? How do we turn that individual sort of into a team sport as they get older and everything? So even simple things like understanding, well, have your players, do they play other sports? Where else might they be learning techniques away from training, which can obviously help us and join up the dots? Things such as, have they got siblings? So are they playing away from training, maybe in the garden or at school or things like that as well? And again, I think all of that, once we understand their motivations and everything of why players want to play, we can then really focus on that technical, tactical area, the receiving, the turning. But until we understand that, I'm not sure that you get player buy-in anyway. So I think, if we understand the intentions and motivations, we're halfway there.
I think a big question for me around this is sort of where we coach and where our priorities are. And if I go and support a coach or support a teacher in a school delivering a football program or some physical education, I'll often find that the left-hand side of the model is very, very prevalent in terms of that technical and physical stuff. And I think when it comes to the right-hand side, we talk about how we might help players with it, or it's almost a bit of a byproduct of the left-hand side, the right-hand side, rather than explicitly going after it. So for me, this is a big thing I think we need to focus on going forward is equalising the four areas of the model, not in terms of time, but in terms of importance and in terms of like session aims and outcomes. So the psychological box, I'm thinking sort of primary school age children, foundation phase, I might be thinking about confidence. I might be thinking about concentration levels. I might be thinking about emotional control, those types of things. As we perhaps move into secondary school or with older players or pupils, I might be starting to think about psychological skills such as decision making or problem solving, or can they have a quick scan and a look and take a picture and process that information and then be able to make a decision about what they've just taken a picture of. So I think the priorities change based on age. So there's just a few examples there. But for me, the psychological, social stuff is something I think we need to try and get better at supporting players with.
I suppose, Paul, if I come to you around, you started to touch on the physical corner, but around that, and then I suppose where the tactical element fits in across all the four corners as well.
It's really hard to get the physical transfer during the week into the Saturday and Sunday. But if you look at things like getting players to, if you look at every other invasion game like basketball or anything, getting players to think about intercepting rather than tackling. So they have to move, they have to get into position. And positioning is massive. And positioning is all about movement. And whether you've got the ball or you haven't, it's can you get into better positions to receive the ball? Where are you standing? How can you get back? Recovering. What I'm saying is every part of the game, there's a physical element to it. And you're very seldom, you can stand still, and there's a tactical reason why you might stand still. But essentially, Sometimes you have to sprint. Sometimes you have to jump. Sometimes you have to just take a few steps sideways. Sometimes you run backwards and fall over, right? Or you have to go sideways on or something. So how are we replicating these movements during the week in practices? Tactics at an individual level is massively important for players. So how all that means tactics is getting the upper hand over your opponent. So how do we help kids understand of what can they do against their immediate opponent at an individual level? How are you going to stop your immediate opponent getting the upper hand over you? So, for example, if you're fast and the player you're playing against is slow, you might just run past them. But if they're quicker than you, that's not possible. So you're going to have to come up with some other tactic. You're going to have to come, and the whole thing is to try and get into kids the idea of everybody can be tactical. The whole game is tactical, but it's at an individual level, a group level, and a team level.
We've posted some questions on the screen there around each corner, and I think hopefully these help to frame thinking around the different areas, and some of the things that we have to consider. So Lydia mentioned in the video around from a psych perspective that that age under 16, they've got exams to deal with. Things like that, the pressures that might bring. You've touched on the physical side of things, Paul, and the time of the year plays a massive part in that, doesn't it? In terms of the time of the season, the game load, absolutely. Obviously Chris working in school environment and for that social perspective, and you talked about friendship groups there, Paul, and then that transition from primary school to secondary school can be a massive one in terms of affecting them socially. If I come to you, Chris, is that the young people we're working with are going to progress at different rates across these different areas of the four corner model as well. And so, a couple of examples there of player A and player B who, might be around 11 years old, again, going through that transition of, going from primary school to secondary school and all the psychological and social effects that might have. But two players at that age can look very different and act very different, can't they, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Linking back into what I was saying earlier around the four corners, which is sort of highlighting here in the differences. It's thinking about when we view our players and we view who our so-called better players are, what lens are we looking at that through? Because I'll probably bet my bottom dollar that if we're thinking about talented players in your team, if you think about why they might be talented, I bet it's on the red and yellow continuums as opposed to the green and the blue one. So you might have someone who's actually really socially good for the team, is a good leader, communicates well, organises, likes solving problems, likes coming up with tactics and strategies, likes organising. We need those players in our team. We need them. So that's a gifted and talented player on the social psych side.
These players might be around, the age of that Lydia was talking about and referenced, and as they get older, that those differences can become even more stark, can't they, across the different areas?
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan, and particularly, obviously, I know a lot of the people on the call will be working with female players, so just consider different stages of maturation, puberty, and obviously bearing all of that in mind as well. Chris has alluded to it already, but I think let's just say you went into a shoe shop, and we were all 21 years old. You wouldn't go in and say, "Can I have the shoes for a 21-year-old?" They'd measure your feet and go, "Well, you're a size 9, size 10, etc., etc." And we've got to do that as coaches. So we've got to look at that scale that's up on the screen and go, well, actually, Chris might be, might be 14 years of age, but technically he's 16. But socially, this is where he's at. And again, I think we need to just really bear that in mind with where our players are. Think about all the stuff we've spoke around already. So what's the tactical age? Where are they at in terms of physical development? Where are they at in terms of, like I alluded to at the start, are they playing lots of sports, or is this their first sort of dip in the toe, and you might be the only hour that they come to apart from obviously school during the week? So I think if we have a little look and a focus and everything, and slide up and down that scale, and particularly focus on where the players are at now and what support they need, I don't think we'll go too far wrong.
No, that's brilliant, and I think that leads us nicely on to kind of looking at this next theme of, recognizing the importance of a holistic approach when we start to design our practices as well, and what we mean by that. You mentioned the realism to the game, the relevance to the game, and I think that brings us nicely, Paul, onto this slide. That we've titled the 3 R's, and I know this is something that you see as absolutely critical in terms of practice design, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the game will always bail you out if you run out of ideas. Yes, you can walk and have a cup of tea, and the kids will still be playing when you come back, right? So it's your best friend. The game's the best friend. What we tend to do is, and it's a bit of a concern, it's not an academic subject we're learning. It's not a subject, it's a game. And the game is directional. There's a target, there's a castle to attack, and there's one to defend, the goal. One thing that we could do is don't be wedded to the outcome. If the kids are really doing well in a practice, and you get the sense and you think, do you know what? They're just on fire. Why would you stop it and say, right, it's 20 minutes, we're going on to the next one? Why wouldn't you just keep it going? So I think it's really important to keep the realism, relevance, and repetition as optimum as you can. And experience will tell you, and looking at the kids, you'll tell whether the kids find it relevant and realistic because of the way that they're performing.
So yeah, I think it's quite versatile in how it's used and why it can be used, but for the constraints-led reason, or from a differentiation, adaptive teaching perspective, I think it's a very simple. My mind's very simple. It works in simple ways, so this suits me down to the ground. It's something I don't plan in advance because you don't know what you're going to change until you're in the moment.
Yeah.
So it's very sort of reflecting in action rather than on action, isn't it? Of doing it in the moment. What's not quite right. I need to manipulate and change something here for this reason. So you sort of try something. Sometimes that doesn't work. That's okay.
Yeah.
I get things wrong every time I teach a lesson or coach a session. But it's about recognising it and then making the tweak or the adaptation that then sort of sorts that problem out.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'd really recommend any coaches who are with us tonight who've maybe seen that for the first time, and to really have a look at our resources around the step principle on the England Football and YouTube channel, on the website, and I'm seeing lots of comments in the chat box around particularly coaches who are working in grassroots environments who've got a complete range of abilities, where they might have that player that we talked about who's come from an academy, but they might have also someone in the same group who's coming to the first ever football session. And, like you said, you've looked at it from an adaptive practice point of view. And, I'd really encourage people to delve into it further to really look at how they can support and challenge all those players. And I think that, also underpins, Gary, doesn't it, the practice spectrum, and looking at how we might develop techniques, how we might look at then, progress on to developing skills and the types of practices that we might use, which will help the players across those four corners. And I'm sure this is something you see in the female game of different ways that the practice spectrum is used to get our different outcomes.
Absolutely, Ryan. I think it's the skill of the coach is selecting the right practice at the right time. So as you can see on your screen, ranging from unopposed up to matched up practices, etc. Obviously, think about the right, what is the right part of the practice spectrum to use at the right time. So what is it your players need and what do they want? So again, it goes back to knowing your players, understanding where they are and everything. And if we look towards the right of the screen where it says around more matched up practices, obviously linked to that, you're going to have more decisions to make, more problems to solve. So I think, again, it's just thinking we're not saying don't use unopposed practices. We're just thinking around, well, actually, is that the right thing to do for your players? How long do you stay there? What do you do? And again, you can move up and down the practice spectrum as you see fit. So when I first started coaching, I was very, very guilty of just staying in one particular area of the spectrum. But actually, you need a range at the right time, in the right stage for your players, and they'll stay engaged and develop holistically as well.
And Chris, if we start to look at this, rather than just from one session, but starting to look at this over a period of time, and I really like this, the graphic that we've got on the screen now, which I know you've been influential in terms of putting together around, looking at how we might meet some intended outcomes over that period and where that might fit across the four corners.
Yeah, so just try to pull together a bit of an example from. I think I was using a context of under 11s here, and how I might use this holistic approach, and what the needs and wants of the players are. And I think a key thing for me here is if I've got an under 11s team, I'm thinking, right, what do I need to do with them this year to unlock what they need to do next year? And that's what I need to deliver this year for them, so that when we go to under 12s next year, we've got that foundation and we're ready for the next thing up on the food chain sort of thing. So just a few examples here. I might have some of my players who just come to football. The PE experience at primary school might be mixed, good, bad, or indifferent. So there could be some basic building blocks of movement that's not there yet. So I've put an example in of how I might work on some agility skills, and I've related it's sort of a theme of attacking skills in scoring goals. So in those one-on-ones that Paul was just talking about, whether you're on a big pitch or a small pitch, you need those agility skills.
We just take a snapshot of maybe, like here, week 5, and it's not a case of having to do everything all at once, is it? And seeing it as, right, we need to get everything done in that first week, because, like you said, it's looking at it over the period of time and delving into little bits as we go along, which ultimately will help you to meet those intended outcomes by the end of the 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it might be. And I think it's really powerful, isn't it, for coaches to bear that in mind and not worry if it's not all going to play after week 1, because it does take time, doesn't it? I think that brings us nicely onto the final part in terms of, meeting those intended outcomes from a holistic perspective and supporting those individuals. And
if they feel as though they're active agents in the learning or in the development that's going on, you're going to get higher levels of motivation and higher levels of engagement. And feeling like an active agent is because the coach asks your opinion, includes you, makes you feel as though your opinion is valued, and more importantly is acted upon. So we can often get coaches saying, come on kids, give me all your ideas, and then you bosh them and you say, but we'll use mine. Actually, if you're asking their opinions and including them, it's important that you try it.
They might only have 20 minutes on what you're trying to focus on, so I would stick with that. The final bit that I'd say is around keeping that message consistent. So another experience that I had was I progressed from that grassroots team into a professional clubs development centre, and we were given a 10-week plan. And it sounds like the kid's trying to be smart here, but it wasn't. It was just generally confused, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me. Week 1 was dribbling. So you all know that the message is stay on the ball, head up, little touches, everything like that. Same group, same player. Week 2, the theme was passing. So again, move the ball quickly, less touches, etc. And the kid come up to me during a drinks break and Gary, I'm really confused because last week you told us to stay on the ball, but this week you want us to move it really quick. What do you want? And he wasn't a disruptive kid, but for me personally, that was one of going, no, actually, this message needs to be consistent, and we're not rushing things for rushing's sake. So take your time with your players and back your ability.
Look at that sort of, and obviously you've probably got some games in there. So how does that come out in terms of managing training to match day, working on the same things, looking for the same things? So actually, you've probably got 6 times 1 hour sessions, plus you might have 5 games in that period as well to work on the same stuff. So then all of a sudden you've got 11 or 12 hours of time with the players. But yeah, linking back to the next slide around session aims and outcomes, definitely top left is what I normally see if I'm going to support a coach and deliver some feedback and provide them with some reflections on what they're doing and helping them sort of on their journey. And if I do see stuff on the right, I don't see it come out generally in practice. I've seen it in pockets. I've seen pockets of good practice in this, but it's very rare I'll see a session outcome as a psychological or a social one. Than mainly sort of left-hand side of the model.
Plan, do, reviewing is about being on the edge of saying, do you know what? I need to change this session. And you need to do it all the time. You can't wait to the end of a session or an end of a week and go, do you know what? I wish I'd changed the area size. You see it all the time. Coaches do that and they go, oh, how did it go? And he went, do you know what? I should have changed the area size. I said, why didn't you do it then? What are you waiting for? So if you think you're reviewing, you should be reviewing all the time. The moment the kids come in, you're looking at them going, he's not up for it, or she's not up, or do you know what? They're on fire tonight. And so on. So that review process, I think, is a continuous thing. And it's about you being in it. You're the spirit of football and you're in it with them. And if you're in it with them, you feel what they feel. And I don't mean you literally because you're not playing, but you get a feel for, this is going well or this isn't going well. You don't have to write anything down. You just have to feel it.
I think it can be summarised on this slide here. And, like we said, if we want to get the best out of the players across those four corners from a holistic point of view, then providing that really positive, thriving learning environment is key to that. And hopefully there's some key messages which can help with that. And a lot of the things we've touched on tonight in terms of, the language that we might use, the problems that we might set, and how we use interventions to really help. And, Gary, you mentioned earlier around fun, and, that's there, isn't it? Learning, they're getting better at doing things. There's that, it's a two-way process. It's not just the coach, it's the two-way process. Ultimately, if we can give that positive environment to provide fun, then hopefully they keep coming back, which is ultimately what we want. And like you summarised it, Paul, in terms of the spirit of football. And if we embed that spirit of football and keep it burning, and hopefully, like it has done for us, it keeps burning for the rest of their life, then hopefully we've done a really good job. And for me, that's success.